I can. You are good to go.
Okay. Thanks, Jeremy. Well, hello, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit today about a kind of fun and entertaining experiment we did here, and that was kind of a study of collective individual forecast methods via flowcharts, a unique kind of approach to determining the actual forecast process and how it varies. So I'm sure all of you have made similar observations to what we have, that the forecast process varies widely from forecasters in a WFO. It's highly dependent on individual education and maybe a forecaster's experience. And that diversity seems to have really become amplified with a couple of modern innovations or assimilations into operations, and that includes the adoption of NBM, the National Blended Models, and especially with the implementation of the GS 5 through 12 forecaster structure in the WFOs. Many of our veteran forecasters, as you all know and have observed, have had the benefit of attending the old school forecaster development, right? That was a huge benefit that a lot of us had at the beginning of our careers. They're also very experienced and well-versed in the applications of conceptual models, and they know how to skillfully apply those conceptual models to make targeted corrections to the NBM during particularly high-impact weather events. On the flip side, many of our incoming forecasters have a whole new skill set. They're very highly trained in a more statistical approach with a reliance on NBM and these blended model using tools like ensembles and cluster analysis, and very analytic approach to forecasting, whereas before it seemed to be more based on pattern recognition and such. So for those of us who have been in this business for a while, it sometimes seems as if that the forecast process that we learned with the old forecast funnel from this comment module has really kind of been turned on its head a little bit. And of course, I don't believe that that's honestly the truth. What I think is the actual emphasis or the time that you're investing in the forecast has shifted within that forecast funnel approach. So kind of the challenge that we see with these contrasting approaches is, the NWS seems to be facing a little bit of a cultural challenge here as this gap widens between the more experienced and the newer, less experienced forecasters. Is how do you transfer that veteran skill set to the next generation of forecasters whose experience is more limited to the more automated model blended error processes, so that targets of opportunity can be recognized and to improve upon the NBM forecast, so that those are recognized consistently, not just from shift to shift, but from WFO to WFO. And we're going to really focus for a couple of slides on this idea of the targets of opportunity. I know we've all experienced this, but targets of opportunity do exist. They are not a myth. This is an example over RCWA from just late last week, where the forecasters appropriately deviated from the NBM. You can see the NBM on the upper right and the NDFD on the upper left, where they decreased pops within the first 36 hours of the forecast from about 75 to 80% probability from NBM down to around 50-ish, and probably could have gone a little lower here in central Oklahoma. And you can see from Irma at the lower left what actually transpired. Now, there are a lot of lessons learned just from this simple case. You try to collaborate that type of deviation from NBM, and you can see that you get a little bit of a mess and not a pretty consistent picture across CWA borders, because what might be a target for us here locally in Oklahoma City could actually be detrimental, to the forecast, let's say in Childress, Texas. So you have to be very this is a very targeted, precise approach to forecasting that we really need to apply. And if we don't, you can certainly question, well, a 70 to 80% pop on this particular day, is that a good public service? for central Oklahoma, including the Oklahoma City metro area. That's certainly a rain forecast, and as you can see, rain just did not transpire. So many of you may be aware that in Southern Region, we recently had a Targets of Opportunity team that drafted a report to identify and provide a quantified definition of a target of opportunity. I encourage everyone, if they have not seen that report, to look it up and give that a read. It was chaired by one of our forecasters here at WFO Norman, Dr. Vivek Mahali. Excellent report. I believe other regions have also since adopted or chaired similar groups or teams to look into this problem too, so that we can have a starting point of a consistent definition of just what is a target of opportunity. So the central question that we wanted to address with this particular project is, so what really is the forecast process in a model blended error? So the motivation was to capture the steps that forecasters are using to create a forecast with the goal of arriving at an idealized workflow for forecasters. And our methodology was to basically map out the forecast process from all the various forecasters at WFO Norman through the creation of these flowcharts. And we used Google Slides, but basically we want to capture the process from data collection to forecast publication. What does that workflow really look like on an individual basis, and hopefully find some commonalities that we can apply to training. So the idea did not begin at WFO Norman. It was actually introduced during the Warren on Forecast Systems virtual hazardous weather test bed last spring. And on the left is an example from WPC that was provided to the test bed. And then on the right, it turned out that one of our forecasters that was participating in the test bed, Matthew Day, has a particular knack for developing these workflow charts. And this is one he produced for mesoscale applications and using the Warren on Forecast system that actually became the poster child for the Warren on Forecast system team as they moved forward and provided examples for how to conduct these flow charts. So I'm going to go through a few examples. This one is from an SPC forecaster that he produced, or this person produced during the Warren on Forecast systems team HWT experiment to show the workflow for issuing watches on a particular case. So I'm just showing this mainly to show you just how elaborate and complex these flow charts can be. I'm going to go through a few examples from WFO Norman in the course of our exercise. I'm not going to highlight any details of any of them. Feel free to screenshot them or what have you. I'll pause for just a moment so you can kind of glimpse some of the detail. But these are the ones that our forecasters produced. They were focused on the long-term forecasts for this iteration. And then we went through the process of having folks produce these flow charts, and then we discussed them in a brown bag type seminar that we held just to kind of discuss and come up with commonalities. I'll go through a series of 4 of them here kind of slowly so you can just get an idea of what they look like. I can tell you, here's a nice, simple, very well streamlined, very well organized flow chart. The actual shapes of the individual components mean something. I apologize, but I can't remember. I think one's like the beginning and the end clearly, and then a process or a line of thought. And then I can tell you, this is not a concept. This is something I struggled with mentally. My brain doesn't seem to work this way, and it took me several asks for help to get the concept down, but this is the ugly one I finally produced myself. Just showing the kind of the circular process from shift briefing all the way through identifying targets of opportunity and then the individual tasks that need to be accomplished on a forecast shift. So in general, what were some of the findings? We found it was a really great exercise to document the commonalities and the actual objectives of a forecast process. There were things that stood out in all of them that were common. The use of a forecast funnel approach, diagnosing the synoptic scale pattern, doing a comparison of the models relative to trends and spread, to review the current forecast grids out there and look for deltas that need to occur in subsequent updates. Also, there were some things that were unique Some folks, the order in which they accomplish tasks were different. Some people would write their AFD first to help get their mental picture. Others would do the grids and then come back and do the AFD afterwards. The use of ensembles was not consistent across the staff. Also, how folks came in the following shift and went back and verified their forecast. That's a good best practice that's not consistent in the current methodology. But we did find that we had enough data gathered that we could, find these consistencies, find the things that are unique, and start to focus our training. And really the key concept I want to highlight here is that the forecast, there are many different ways to accomplish your job or accomplish your task, but the key thing is you got to connect synoptic and mesoscale features to that you see in the observations and satellite data and observational data to conceptual models, and use that to identify targets of opportunity where you can collaboratively improve the forecast. And I think that's got to be like the mission statement that all of these different workflows and methods are grounded in. So what are some ideas for some future work? We're continuing this at other scales. We're now diving into more of a short-term or mesoanalysis type exercise. We'd also like to focus on individual phenomena or hazards like severe thunderstorms or winter storms, maybe hydrology, and then maybe even introduce, we all have shift duty lists, right? Well, how about a task-based flow chart for things like troubleshooting BMH or NWR, or maybe creating the monthly climate products that someone might do once a year or what have you. But also, we'd like to look into an expansion of this study to neighboring offices, so it's not just localized within the walls of WFO Norman, but we get a broader sampling of how this job is being tackled and these forecast challenges tackled at other WFOs as well. So I know it's a short presentation. I'm actually the tertiary author on this abstract, so you ended up with me today through scheduling and other complications, but hopefully it was worth your while, and be glad to take a few minutes to answer any questions if we have time. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. We do have some time, I believe. We're still running a tad bit behind, but we can take a couple questions if somebody wants to ask. You should have all the ability to unmute yourselves now, but if you're having problems, just raise your hand.
Hey, Todd, this is John up in North Platte. Really interesting study. Thanks for bringing that to our group here. Just curious, and thanks for bringing up FDC. I was one of the lucky ones back in '94 to get to go to that. Just curious if you run up against some of the folks who are more conceptually minded, kind of saying, what's the point if I end up, if we have NBM populating the grids anyway? Do you come across as a SU having to deal with any of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that case that I showed from just last week was sort of an example of that, where our forecasters felt like their hands were tied. They tried to collaborate that. There was only so much movement they could get in neighboring offices to deviate. They wanted to go 20s and 30 pops based on the data that they're seeing, and that would have been the correct call. So yeah, as we get into this model blended error, there's no doubt that the forecast process is changing the way forecasters work, and really what we do find when we do some sort of quantitative evaluation, we find that the veteran forecasters are still performing at a very high level. They're hitting more of these forecasters or more of these forecasts in the challenging forecasts than some of the less experienced forecasters. So we really need to find a way to bridge this gap and transfer that knowledge down to our under-experienced forecasters. And so I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of, yes, there is pushback, but what I'm really focusing on as a SU is meteorology is not dead. You're still very much needed to be a meteorologist. It's just where you focus your work and your time and your energy is shifting, and we've got to win the days that matter in the short-term period.
Great, thanks. Appreciate it.
Yeah, Todd, thank you. Go ahead.
This is Bill Pointer. I'm the MIC up at Hastings. This is more of an observation, I think, than a question. But in some ways, I feel like a lot of the things that we're doing right now are, I call it back to the future. You know, I started forecasting in 1986. And, you know, the whole idea of sort of streamlining, you know, you're doing flowcharts of our forecasting process was pretty common back in the 80s. Of course, back then we also used to flowchart our computer programs before we started writing them. So some of that may have actually come out of that or even earlier. But it's not just this mesoscale analysis. That whole effort right now is not something I consider new. To me, that was the way we forecasted back in the late 80s and early 90s because, you know, we only had like 2 models to choose from. You know, there was a lot more emphasis on things like global area work charts. And, you know, I've got a copy of Charlie Crisp's training guide for severe weather forecasting that shows you how to do an entire severe weather analysis on a set of upper air charts, you know. So I don't know. In some ways, I feel like there's a bit of an emphasis to going back to some of the techniques that we used in the past, which I think is a good thing. But I don't think that it's necessarily helpful to pretend that it's new. It's not. It's, you know, us picking the lessons from the past and deciding which ones really do translate into value today. I think that's a good thing, but like I said, it's not new.
I would actually 100% agree with that. And in fact, our last year, fiscal year 21, the training objective of our office was back to basics. And I think that's exactly right. Not just, you know, the use of flow charts, mesoscale analysis, like you said, is a huge focus, but also, you know, how important are conceptual models becoming now that, you know, we're in the blended era, and sometimes, you know, NBM can still not quite handle a high impact event well, and you've got to rely on your conceptual models to know how to identify those targets of opportunity. So totally agree. It's really back to meteorology 101. We're learning that experience is huge, and you really can't compensate for that. Yeah, thanks for that comment.
All right. Well, thanks again, Todd. This is fascinating talk. I actually think one of the things we've kind of forgot about when we were doing the you know, rolling the blends out and things like forecast builders, we kind of left that step of what do you do? How do you interact with it? We kind of left that up to everybody. And I like this idea of even simply trying to identify what targets of opportunity are, because I appreciate the Bigfoot picture there, because in some ways it kind of felt like that. It was something out there nobody could really define. So this is neat. I might be contacting you later about this as well. So thanks for the talk and your time, and I appreciate all you guys at Norman coming to help us out a little bit during this seminar. All right, so next up I'm going to take control back again. I'm actually cheating a little bit here. I'm doing the next talk. It's about an event we just had literally last month. It was a month ago. It would be about a month ago last week, so it's not too long ago. I'm kind of cheating though because I recorded mine earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and take back control.